Welcome everyone, et bienvenue à tous et à toutes. I'm Catherine Carlton, Executive Director of Orchestras Canada, Orchestre Canada. I speak to you today from my home in Peterborough, Ontario, Nogajiwanong, on land covered by the Williams Treaty, Treaty 20. May we honor the teachings of the Michisagi Anishinaabe, the longtime stewards of this land. I also bring greetings on behalf of the Association for Opera in Canada, the Canadian Dance Assembly, the Canadian Association for the Performing Arts, and the Professional Association of Canadian Theatres. They are our partners for today's webinar on top trends in digital marketing and fundraising. This event is part of the ArtsBoost series, generously funded by the Canada Council for the Arts. And this series includes the ArtsBoost Fundamentals, a multi-class course in digital arts marketing and fundraising that will soon boast over 100 graduates. A second free webinar coming up in December on building a test and learn culture, and launching in 2022 a self-guided online program based on the ArtsBoost Fundamentals program. We are so lucky to work with Tim Dolan and the team at the Arts Firm to present these programs to you and to be able to offer simultaneous interpretation thanks to Christiane Martel and Merrick Redburn. Apprenons ensemble. Tim, over to you.
Hey, welcome to our webinar here today, the top trends in digital marketing and fundraising. My name is Tim Dolan. I am in Toronto, and I acknowledge that this land as the territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. I also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by the Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. And so I'm really excited to be able to share the material with you here today and have a conversation about top trends. A little bit about me. My name is Tim Dolan. I have a company called Kickframe, and we focus on digital literacy for organizations. I've had the pleasure of working with a number of arts organizations over the years, including the Toronto Symphony Orchestra, as well as the Royal Conservatory of Music. And I'm really proud to say that I've had the pleasure of teaching many folks within arts organizations over the past year as part of the digital marketing and fundamentals course of the ArtsBoost course. So the focus of today is to discuss the key digital trends that are impacting marketing and fundraising and the implications of arts organizations. A reminder again that this session is going to be recorded. The slides will be available and the chat is open. We'll reserve a bit of time for those questions at the end. So why a session on digital trends? This is a very well-attended session. So why is this so important and seemingly so popular? I think for a couple of different reasons. One is just the importance of digital as a channel. And so even before the pandemic, patrons turned for websites and digital marketing channels and digital fundraising channels to be able to find out about performances, to buy tickets. And fundraisers, even before the pandemic, were looking at digital and social media as an important channel to be able to increase donations and support. And then what's happened since the pandemic is that COVID has really accelerated digital adoption across all industries, arts included. And so what we're seeing now is that one of the interesting aspects of COVID is that many arts organizations, 83%, have tried new digital things as a result of the pandemic, and 93% are planning to use digital as part of their reopening plans. One of the things that I take a look at too are what are some of the different habits or behaviors that are going to stick around, whether that's e-commerce or online learning. There are a lot of things that people have tried over the last 18 months that frankly, people aren't going to go back to. And I think these are other things that we need to be mindful of in thinking about our plans. And then the other part that I think is as important is it's not just important for arts organizations, is taking a look at digital from the perspective of patrons. And what we're seeing through research, and probably just anecdotally as well, is that patron expectation around the digital experiences that we provide continue to increase with all of the other digital services that they're using in their day-to-day. One of the other parts too, what are some of those lasting behaviors that we also want to be making sure that we're aware of, to make sure that we're incorporating or at least considering them within our plans as well. And so what we're going to talk about here today is not one channel or area of digital specifically, but rather what are some of those trends that are on the short and medium term horizon that marketers and fundraisers really need to be thinking about now to incorporate within their plans over the next couple of years. And how we're going to do that is take a look at 5 different trends. Now, typically when you want to put trends together, you want them to be mutually exclusive and completely exhaustive. This is intentionally overlapping and definitely incomplete because the world of digital continues to change so much, and there's so much overlapping of concepts that it's difficult to be able to tease those out. But in putting this together, we've synthesized a lot of data and information from a lot of different sources and bubbled up, I think, 5 discrete themes. Each one we're going to be going through here today. We'll talk first about social video. We'll talk about the creator economy. We'll talk about search and discoverability. We'll talk about relevance and scale. And then finally, privacy and targeting. So let's start with social video. I think this is an important one to start off with, just because the amount of growth around this format, as well as the social apps that people use to be able to engage with live streaming or social video, continues to increase at a really rapid rate. And so when we're looking at the amount of time being spent in different social apps, those ones that are focused on live streaming and including a lot of video continue to surpass other ones that do not. And as marketers and fundraisers, we want to be really aware of where our audiences are to make sure that we're engaging with them where they're at. And this is another important part, is recognizing that this is not something that is going to go away anytime soon, because a lot of the platforms that we're using are really evolving to be able to prioritize live streaming and video content. And so this is being led by TikTok. Instagram has incorporated stories to great success over the last couple of years. And then other platforms like Spotify or Twitter or LinkedIn are really prioritizing video content in their own ways. And so the platforms themselves are reshaping themselves to prioritize this type of content and this type of feature. And as a result, businesses are starting to spend more of their marketing dollars and their content creation dollars in video. And so this is something that I think is really interesting to make sure that we're aware of, because a lot of what they're spending on isn't necessarily television commercials or long format video programming. It's a lot of short video made for consumption over social. And the other thing that I would remind you of is that 80% of time spent on social is in mobile. And so as a result, the formats of video, it's not just that we're investing more in video, but the format of that video is changing. And video and social video is evolving too, to become a bit more multifaceted. And I think there's some kind of sub-trends to be aware of as well. And so if we take a look at how this format is starting to evolve within the platforms, video and social and live streaming is becoming a bit more commercial. You may have heard the term social commerce. That's referring to social media and commerce coming together to be able to have transactions within the platforms. And so over the last couple of years, you've seen Instagram with things like shoppable posts, Snapchats with the shop button, and TikTok having a partnership with Shopify to bring in donations and transactions all within a single platform, rather than having the patron to be able to click out and do that in another place or space. Another part is education. I think this is a really interesting trend. And I'm not just saying that because I'm a trainer. When we were doing a lot of work with companies around content plans, we focused a lot on 2 different areas from a consulting standpoint. Historically, you're looking at content that really entertains, or content that's useful. And what we saw during the pandemic particularly was content that is useful or educational really start to take off. It's interesting in terms of the amount of new courses that are starting to pop up. If you are on the DMFA course, you're probably familiar with the Thinkific platform. They saw over a 200% increase in new course creators year over year. And if you're an active user on a lot of social platforms and follow along different DIY content, you'll see that coming across a lot of different disciplines, including a special focus on the arts. So there's an opportunity around commercial, around learning, as well as events. And I know many of you have likely tried live events in your own way over the last 18 months. This is another area where there's been a huge amount of growth, and this even predates the pandemic. But a lot of different formats are being used to be able to do live streaming and live events over digital platforms. One of the things that I found interesting was some recent research that showed that companies in the US and UK, 51% of them that have never done any of this types of thing before are absolutely going to continue it post-pandemic. And I think that is reflective of a lot of the conversations I've had with students within the course, where we're looking at more of like a hybrid option around not just performances, but also ways to be able to engage patrons. So what does this all mean for arts organizations in marketing and fundraising roles? I think the three things that I would say for so what are think native. What I mean by that is, spend some time in the platforms, even if you're not interested in them, to be able to understand how they work, how people behave, and what people are looking for. So think native and spend some time in these platforms like TikTok, because we can start to not just think about adapting existing content to that platform, but understand what works well and recontextualize some of the art that we're doing in that way. Think small. I think this is another area where we oftentimes looking at creating content with high production values and high polish. And to be able to create content within social video, you don't have those same sorts of expectations or constraints. And so you probably have heard the concept of the minimal viable product before. Think about the minimal viable piece of content that you can create to be able to increase your capacity to be able to create more through these channels as well. And then think big. What are some of the different, new ways that you can start to explore that could be enabled by, live streaming or this different type of storytelling? There's a lot of interesting success stories throughout the pandemic where retailers have taken down to a very small footprint, and now we're doing a lot of their sales through live auctions. You also see things like fundraisers doing things like an old school dial-in call over live streaming. And so really embracing the unique aspects within social video could be a really interesting space to be able to explore. Please. The next trend that I'd like to talk about is one of these overlapping trends. And this refers to something that you've probably read a lot about, which is the creator economy. To define that, the creator economy refers to the numerous businesses built by independent creators, from vloggers to influencers to writers, to monetize themselves, their skills, and their creations. So what does this mean? So if we kind of zoom back, where is this kind of coming from? And it's kind of been coming for a while. If you zoom out and think about the change that's happened within media and publishing, it starts to make more sense. Where there used to be just a few channels to be able to share content and a number of different gatekeepers to be able to do that in traditional media. Now, there's not this monoculture. There's a lot of different engaged subcultures, and then creators can use digital as a tool for creation, a tool for distribution, and now a tool for direct monetization. So there's a number of different channels for a lot of creators to be able to engage directly with those people that they have relationships with and their own audiences. And it's really fascinating to see how different art and artists are enabled by a lot of these digital tools for creation, distribution, and now monetization. The writers moving to platforms like Substack to be able to make money directly from their audiences, to musicians on SoundCloud, and to, if anyone is a gamer here, to have audiences live on Twitch. There's a lot of different platforms that are enabling different types of art and artists. And so what does that mean around monetization and opportunities around marketing? Well, if we look at creators, this has enabled this other area of marketing, which we talk about in the course, called influencer marketing, and where brands and organizations can work directly with creators to be able to kind of share their offers or their brand or their news on their behalf. And this has become historically like a way for a lot of creators to be able to monetize what they're doing. What I think is a larger trend, though, is that there's a lot more new ways that these creators are monetizing their audiences in ways that I think arts organizations can start to take some cues from. And so no longer do creators need to kind of work directly with a brand to try to get influencer marketing money. If you're ever on Twitch, as an example, you can see how a lot of these creators who have an audience that's engaged with them are monetizing their attention by things like sponsored content, paid affiliations, getting donations. There's even things like buy me a coffee to get all of these small micro donations across a large audience directly from consumers that can end up adding up. And so the variety of ways to be able to monetize directly with your audience is increasing. And in the same way that social video is being enabled by changes that are happening within social platforms to prioritize social content, the platforms themselves are prioritizing creators. And so a lot of the major platforms are redesigning some of the monetization tools to be able to attract a lot of these creators to be able to kind of do live streaming and to host their art within their platforms. YouTube famously just put in $100 million to be able to kind of attract more people within the platform and bring their audiences with them. And I think there's some really interesting lessons here. You might not look at yourself as a creator, but you're certainly creative. And there's some tips that we can kind of take from the creator playbook that could be applied more broadly. You see some examples here from the National Ballet of sort of using sort of like their direct personality to create these small stories, as well as monetize around things like online classes to be able to create some of this connection directly with their audiences using digital and social media as an enabler. So what does this mean? What are some of the opportunities that we can unpack for arts organizations? A couple of big themes, and I think these are really interesting to think about and take away. One is to think about publishing like a creator. Again, to my point earlier about thinking native, it could be helpful for you to just spend some time on some of these platforms, even if you're not a gaming fan, to be in Twitch, to be able to understand what are some of the ways that these creators or groups are connecting with their audiences and engaging with them over time. Typically, it is something that feels very frequent, that is very personal, that's very authentic and direct. And what are some of the ways that you can kind of bring that into the ways that you can tell stories and connect with some of your community in this more sort of direct way? So publishing like a creator, I think there might be themes in there that you might be able to unpack and some examples that we can learn from. The other is to engage like a creator. And this is kind of a broader theme of something I wanted to talk about in the last section, which oftentimes when we look at things like video content, we're creating it with the intent that it's going to be consumed. And I think when you look at what creators are doing, they're creating content to be able to connect. And they're finding these new ways to be able to have their audience engage directly with them. One example here might be putting together a challenge and recruiting people to be able to do something with you over the course of a day, an hour, a week, or a month. I think one of the things that's coming out of COVID is just a recognition of people's interest to be able to connect with others, to be able to find their tribe, and to be able to engage a little bit more fully. Strong creators do a great job of that. And then monetize like a creator. And there's a lot of different examples here. I showed a few earlier in terms of some of the micro donations and contributions that you can ask your audience for. And then there are other things that we can take a look at around platforms like Patreon as an example. Regardless of the platform, I think the larger strategic idea here is, to bring some exclusivity to the patrons that you want to be able to engage. We want to be able to unlock value and to recognize when somebody is contributing more, they get more. And so what does that mechanic start to look like? What does that proposition start to look like? There could be some great ways to be able to think about unlocking that and managing those types of programs through some of these new platforms that a lot of creators use. And then finally, collaborate with creators. And this doesn't mean that you need to put a whole bunch of money into an influencer marketing budget. It can more mean working with some people that you have, a complementary relationship with and have a fit with their audience and yours. And so there may not be, money changing hands, but there may be different initiatives that you can do to be able to do that together. And so I like this example from, I think of a couple of weeks ago of the Toronto Zoo, the Toronto Symphony Orchestra, essentially two creators collaborating together on something new. It's a great way to kind of increase visibility of the art within the zoo and then increase the interest in the zoo with people that are fan of the art. So who are those other organizations or creators more broadly that you might have an audience in common with that you can work together to be able to increase your reach and engagement with the people that you're trying to engage? Trend number 3. Now, I know we go quite deep in the area of search and the digital marketing and fundraising for the arts course. But when we look ahead, one of the things that I think is important is to understand, what are those things that are going to stay the same and what are some of those things that are really changing? And I think search is a really interesting example of that. And so search remains an important channel for patrons to find information about organizations, about what's happening, about information about organizations that they might be interested in donating to. Particularly, we see local search as being something that continues to grow as people are turning to search to be able to find out information around, the businesses and organizations around them. So search remains a really critical tool for organizations to be discovered. However, what has changed is a couple of different things. One is the algorithms that are used by the different search engines like Google to be able to prioritize content. And remember, over 90% of people don't go past the first few listings on the first page of the results. And so having a high ranking on relevant search engine results pages is really important. But the other part too, which I want to talk a little bit more about here today, is just the layout of the search engine results pages itself. So hopefully this video works okay in the PowerPoint, but pages themselves continue to evolve. And so if I'm looking at here Ballet Canada, I'm getting a lot of different things, whether that's a map, whether that's a knowledge panel, whether those are links to social media, to other related searches. And so the search engine results page is becoming a lot more sophisticated. It's becoming a lot more multidimensional. And as a result, we need to be thinking about what are some of the ways that we can optimize our footprint for relevant searches. So what are some of the things that you can do? One of the first parts is thinking about this concept of the knowledge graph. And so a broader trend is something that's referred to as zero-click search. And that refers to Google starting to kind of present more information in search engine results pages that kind of answer your questions without requiring people to go that extra click to be able to find them. And so rather than fighting that trend, and there's some marketers that are disappointed because they feel like their traffic to the websites are going down, but rather than fighting that trend, we can be thinking about what is the ways that we can manage our data to have our best and most accurate information included within relevant search engine results pages. So the first is what's referred to as the knowledge graph, which is what you see here on the right. And so this refers to, the knowledge panel that is being, Google is taking out data from across the web that it's trusted and presenting that as information about a particular topic or thing or object that somebody has searched for. And so if this is something that is searching for you or your organization, you want to be able to, claim your panel, the knowledge panel, as well as to manage your information around the wiki data to be able to make sure that's accurate and complete and structured properly. So the other part is the local business. And so I mentioned this a little bit earlier, that local search continues to be something that is really important, particularly in the era of mobile, where people are searching for a lot more things around them. But the Google My Business listing is something that is a big opportunity for a lot of organizations just to make sure that you're getting things right. And so what you want to be able to do is to manage your Google My Business listings, to be able to manage some of the content, like things like reviews, make sure that information is correct about your address. And particularly during these times, it's a place to be able to communicate some of the different information that people are going to be looking for around what we're doing around safety in this age of COVID. Another area of the site, and you might have noticed this in your own searches too, is what's referred to as featured snippets. It goes back to my earlier point about zero-click search, when Google is sort of putting answers and information about different questions and queries within the page itself. And so in this particular example for TAFL music, it might say, people also ask. And here we can find other information about different definitions or questions people might commonly have related to those keywords. And so what can we do here? Well, we can start to research some of the keywords and queries that we want to be present for, and start to think about creating content for our website that helps address some of these very specific and relevant questions. Remember again that we're approaching almost 20+% of Canadians now have a smart speaker, and even way more people are using voice search. And if they're using a voice search, these featured snippet types of content become even more important. Remember, in that point, they're not browsing for answers. They're looking for, or browsing for options, rather, they're looking for answers to very specific questions. So for those relevant questions, think about the kind of content that you can create to be present for that. And then finally, there's visual assets. And I think this is another big area that you've probably recognized even kind of scrolling through your search results, where you're seeing a lot more video incorporated within the page. And you're seeing a lot more people, depending on the topic, actually looking for images in their image search. And so a lot of us have amazing images, but they may be inaccessible to Google or difficult to find because they're not tagged correctly. And so what we want to do here is follow Google's schema to make sure that they're recognizing and telling the spiders. If you remember, we talked about that for those people in the course, about what this asset is, and including the metadata associated with these images to be able to show up where you want to be able to show up. Some of these sound like a little bit more technical things that you can do, and in some cases they are. The good news is that there's a lot of tools available from Google to be able to follow to figure out how to be able to optimize your content. And the other part is to figure out how to optimize your site itself. And so if you work within search, one of the things that you'll be well aware of is Google famously tries to present and rank options around the best experience around a given query, not just the best content. And they use experience deliberately because they're looking at the quality of the website, where you're actually directing people to after the search engine results page. And so here they have something that's referred to as core vitals. And think of these as diagnostic metrics to be able to understand the quality of the experience that you have on a website. And so again, they have some free online tools to be able to diagnose what you're doing. And they provide you with tips on how you can improve it. And a better performing site, according to these kind of core vitals, is going to actually show up a lot more prominently within search engine results pages. What I'm referring to here is there's three different categories that this core vitals piece is really built on. One is around page loading. So we want to be able to have things that are quick. Time users spent to interact with the page, and that refers to the amount of time it takes somebody to be able to click something or do something. And so that's an indicator of usability. And then finally, how stable the page is while loading, which is more of a technical piece. So finally, I just want to leave you on this trend with the recognition that search is now much more than these 10 blue links. We want to be able to keep on top of how we're represented within relevant search engine results pages, and recognize that we have a lot more options to be able to do that beyond just content on our website. We think about tagging our data and other types of things that we could be doing around the quality of the website itself to be able to improve our performance in this channel, which remains to be really important one. All right, so the next topic that we're going to go through, or theme, is something that, again, is a big theme that goes through the digital marketing and fundraising for the arts course. So it's going to be quite familiar to a lot of you that are familiar with that, but it can't be a trend course to talk a little bit about what's happening around data and the opportunities that we have to be able to do more relevance at scale. And so why is this an important trend? Well, one of the things that's probably not surprising to you is that when we think about things like email communication and even content targeting, those communications that are event-based or are segmented continue to perform a lot better than what we refer to sometimes as batch and blast or unsegmented campaigns. So you can achieve 70% higher open rates from automated campaigns than generic, and 56% higher in segmented versus unsegmented. So our ability to be able to recognize different segments and recognize different moments is a really important part to be able to have well-performing digital direct communication. And so what does that start to mean? Well, when we think about automated campaigns and to be able to have email communications that's really relevant, not only do we have to kind of understand the segment that we want to be able to reach, but we have to think about those key moments that we want to be able to reach that segment or reach that individual. It's probably not surprising to recognize that open rates from welcome emails, this is when somebody signs up for an email newsletter or signs up with you as a subscriber or a patron, those automated campaigns that they receive have performed 86% better than those are just scheduled that are sent out at different times by marketers and fundraisers, say once a month. And so it starts to be really interesting to think about, well, what are those other key moments that may be opportunities for us to be able to engage with people? And I think this is a really, really important one for arts organizations to take away and think about, because quite frankly, this is something that was a lot more complicated to do even 3 or 4 years ago. It would require a lot more resources and technical know-how to be able to set up automated, or what some people call reactive campaigns, using your CRM systems. And so now what's happened is even a lot of these small and medium-sized business platforms, and here I'm showing a screenshot from MailChimp, which I know a lot of you probably use, can be set up a lot easier, and with people that have come from a technical background. And so it's a lot more available to us to think about what are these kinds of automated campaigns that we can set up that are going to perform a lot better, that are timely, that are relevant, and that are engaging for our patron base. And the other part that makes this really interesting too, but it can become a little bit challenging, but is thinking about not just what's happening with email through our CRM activity, but thinking about other channels that we can weave into a cross-channel communication program. We talk a little bit about this in the course, and I know some of you have started to reach out and trial SMS and text-based messages. I would encourage all of us to think a little bit more about the role that it could play in our communications with our patrons. As a place to start, having things that are timely around kind of service-based notifications, particularly if somebody has something coming up and around event, those are the types of things that A, get a very high kind of open and engagement rate, but B, don't have the annoyance factor that some people report when you're sending things out that are a little bit more promotional. And so I would encourage you guys, when you're thinking about your plans for the year, to not just think about the moments that you might be doing some of these automated campaigns, but how might we even mix up some of the channels where we're doing them. And so what I think is really exciting too is that now the work to be done is less about like technical, even though that's going to be a big part of it, but it can be strategic. And so what I mean by that is now, rather than running in and setting up a lot of these campaigns within our CRM software, the better work to be done is to sit back with some of our teams and really think about kind of having clear and smart answers to the following questions. What is the best segment that we want to contact? Who? What is the thing that is going to be most relevant and valuable to them? What? When is the best time to be able to send something to that patron? What is the trigger or moment that we can recognize when this is going to be really relevant and appreciated? And then how? We've just talked a little bit about different types of formats within email, and those email canvases are getting richer by the day. But also thinking about other channels that we might be able to use, which might, by the way, also be things that are offline, triggering like a call from somebody that might be in the fundraising department or the box office, or even direct mail for certain types of audiences. But thinking beyond channels and not just within within one is a big opportunity. So what would be the things that I would propose that you take away as we're thinking about doing more relevance at scale? I think that one of the things is thinking about like the future state experiences that you'd like to be able to provide for your patrons. And when I say patrons, I mean people that might be enjoying your performances as well as supporting you from a financial perspective for fundraising. And so one of the common tools, and we talk about this in the course, is customer journey mapping or patron journey mapping. This can be a really interesting exercise to workshop with your team, is sort of thinking about some of the different steps along the way when somebody is engaging with you. It could be around in a performance and thinking about what are some of the moments that may be an opportunity for you to be able to provide value and a timely reminder around a performance that's coming up, or sending a survey, for example, that might come after the event, or a donation ask once somebody has provided a particularly positive review. And so mapping things out from the patron's perspective in a linear way, to the degree that it can be linear, can really uncover some of these new moments that may be good candidates to do automated campaigns. To be able to do that, though, we also need to think about this concept of signals and triggers. And you can think about these as these different measurable behaviors that we need to be able to track that say, hey, this has happened, we need to be able to send this now. And so the next step, after you've identified some of the different moments that you want to be able to set up automated or trigger-based communication, is making sure that you can recognize when they happen and react to them accordingly. So an example might be one that we're very common with, which is an abandoned cart email. And so here we want to be able to recognize these moments when someone's expressed interest but hasn't converted. And so the trigger we can look at is when somebody has left a particular page and we have the opportunity to be able to communicate with them. Another one might be when somebody has just left a performance, when we want to be able to understand how satisfied they were. And so here the trigger might be a particular date or a redemption. And so if we can track that to our CRM system, we can automate that kind of message going out to that person in that kind of moment. And so understanding the moments, figuring out how we can kind of recognize and operationalize them with triggers is the next part. And the final point that I would recognize and want to talk a little bit about here is not just kind of those moments and the triggers, but also taking a look at the base itself. And oftentimes we're kind of looking at our customer database or patron database and just taking a look at some pretty rudimentary metrics. And here we might just look at the amount that we have a profile that is, we can kind of recognize what their past behavior was, and maybe what their address is, and maybe their last contact. To be able to start to do even more targeted communication, another worthwhile activity is thinking about what a full audience profile should look like from a data perspective. What is the next piece of data that's going to be of really value to you to be able to create meaningful segments? And we have an opportunity, if we're being active within a lot of our programs, to be able to ask people for that, whether that's at the point of registration, whether those are surveys that can be using, or prompts for people to be able to kind of update their and verify the information that you have on the website or within their profile area. All of these are different ways to be able to validate and collect additional information that can be used for targeted communication purposes. And so this is where we want to be able to get to when we think about the trend of relevance at scale. I'm almost done my tea and I'm almost done the presentation. So things have been timed fairly well so far, hopefully. The final trend that I'd like to go to is related to what we just talked about. And that refers to privacy and targeting. And so I think this is one of the trends that's really going to, shape marketing and fundraising from a digital perspective pretty significantly over the next couple of years. And so there's always been this tension that's existed. Anyone that works in this space kind of recognizes that from a marketer or fundraiser perspective, and we just talked about this in the previous trend, there is a desire to be able to collect as much data as we can to be able to market or communicate with greater precision and certainty. And so we've always wanted that and looked for ways to be able to get that. On the other hand, there is concerns and increasing level of awareness around consumers' reluctance or concerns around their data and their privacy. And so, but it's kind of, it's not as black as white as that, because only 33% of customers believe companies are using their data responsibly. However, 66% of customers would consider sharing data for more value. And so there is a concept which we've talked about before around the value exchange. I just read some recent data too that said that 54% of consumers say they are more conscious of the personal data shared through digital communication that they were prior to the start of COVID-19. And so this has always been a debate or a topic that's been kind of brewing for the last 10 years or so, but it's really sort of come to the fore, and probably in the most obvious way through some of the changes that Apple has started to make. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about what are some of those changes that Apple is leading, but I don't want you to interpret this section as just things that Apple's doing, because it's connected to, I think, a larger trend around this, this sort of friction point between how consumers are going to be managing their data and feel comfortable with providing that given where we are with privacy, and what are some of the ways that responsible organizations are requesting or acquiring that data for direct communication purposes. But let's take a look at what Apple's done, because I think these are having some very real impacts on marketing and fundraising plans as we speak. A lot of you are probably recognize already where I'm going with this, but I think it's worth kind of reflecting on as well, is that there has been some kind of changes that have really come to the fore with how Apple has now embraced privacy that have some implications on digital advertising and digital marketing, particularly around advertising email. And so for advertising, what happened in May, which you probably have recognized if you're an iPhone user or have been keeping up in the space, Apple released what it refers to as its app tracking transparency that essentially allows users to be able to opt out of tracking on their iOS devices. So apps can no longer kind of track you across websites for targeting and tracking purposes. And so what that means is that for advertisers who use third-party cookies, and if we remember again what third-party cookies are, essentially, small text-based files that are kind of connected to you and your browser that can be recognized on other websites that advertisers can use for advertising purposes. So as an example, I can recognize somebody that using third-party cookies that, hasn't bought or viewed something, and I can use that cookie for retargeting would be an example. And so what's happened for those people that have opted in, and 90% of people who are given this option are opting out. So for those people, we can't see them anymore, and we can't do a lot of the things that we're kind of used to doing. So what does that really mean? Well, for arts organizations that use Facebook as an example, for a large portion of those people that are saying, do not track me, we can't as easily or effectively do things like retargeting campaigns because we can't track that person, across the app, across two different sites. And as well, the conversion attribution, meaning how we can measure, what is responsible for what kind of outcome, is going to be limited. And because we can't, again, track that same individual or that cookie across multiple iterations across multiple sites. And so that's going to have some impact both on targeting as well as tracking when we look from an advertising perspective. So what can we do? A lot of what we've been kind of talking about is, refocusing our efforts around what's referred to as first-party data. And so this is kind of a fancy way to be able to say, managing your own customer database and increasing the data for those people that you have relationships with, either existing patrons or people that have opted in to receive information from you. That's going to become increasingly important because that's yours to manage. The next, for those of you that are working in advertising campaigns and have some media budget, it may mean doing a lot more contextual advertising directly with publishers. So working with your local publisher to figure out, what are the targeting options that are available. And then finally, I would say is keep an eye on your metrics and more changes to come. There's going to be a lot more that's happening within this space. Google Chrome is planning to do something similar in terms of getting rid of third-party cookies in 2023. So there's going to be more to come. Take a look at your numbers if you are doing digital advertising to understand what the impacts are, and talk to some of your agencies if you're working with them to be able to figure out what can we put in place now to be able to be better prepared for those things. And next is email. So if that is advertising and some of the ways that privacy is making it more difficult for marketers to be able to target and track folks. For email, you may not be aware that Apple just released a mail privacy protection, which does something similar, albeit in a different channel. It allows users of the iOS 15 mail app to be able to opt out from having their address or opens visible. And so this just happened a couple weeks ago, and it allows people to be able to say, I don't want those people that are sending me emails to kind of understand my behavior, to be able to track me, to include tracking pixels within the email. But what does that mean for marketers and fundraisers? Is that when people have opted in to this mail protection, you are not going to be able to see accurately who is opening the email and what they're doing within it to a degree. And so, so what does that mean? So if I'm sending out, say there's 100 people in my list, odds are 35% of them, 35 of them are on this iOS device. Say if they've all put on this privacy protection, I'm going to see that those 35 people have opened an email even if they haven't. And so there's some obvious implications to that from a targeting and tracking perspective. And so what that could mean is open rates become a lot more dubious. And so we can't really get a really effective read on open rates if we're not sure who of that 35% is actually opening our emails. The other is when we're doing some of the automations that we just talked about in the previous channel, which was trend, which was based on somebody's behavior, we're going to send them an automated campaign. A lot of automated campaigns are based on somebody opening up an email. And so now those kinds of campaigns are less effective or not possible to be able to do. So what can we do? One thing that I think is probably the most important part is to refocus your reporting and what success looks like away from open rates to click-through rates, and explore other ways to be able to measure patron engagement. Remember, we're not sending a lot of email out as an example because we're really looking to get open rates. We're doing it because we want donations. We want to be able to get ticket purchases. And so we want to be able to kind of connect the dots around having a better sense of true attribution around the outcomes that we're looking for. And so take a look at things like clicks and take a look at things like outcomes to activity. And then think about other channels. We talked about SMS a little bit earlier. There may be other ways that we can start to get a sense of how people are finding our communication. I expect you're also going to be seeing a lot more things like surveys to be able to understand if people are liking the content of the offers that you're sending via some of these different channels. So a lot more to come in this space. And it's important for us to kind of recognize what those sort of implications and opportunities might be. Which brings us to our summary. So just to kind of bring us back here to the beginning, we talked at the beginning about social video as being a really important kind of format and context to kind of think about, how you want to be able to engage your audiences through this social video, mobile-based kind of asset as well as channel. The creator economy, we talked about how we can kind of take some plays from the creator playbook and apply them ourselves, thinking and publishing and monetizing like creators. And search and discoverability, we talked about what are some of the things that you can do to be able to increase your digital footprint beyond just making sure that you're kind of present in those 10 blue link clicks. Relevance at scale, we talked about the importance of being able to utilize data and identify triggers to be able to communicate with greater efficiency and effectiveness. And then finally, we talked about privacy and targeting around a lot of the changes that are happening to balancing consumer privacy and marketers' interest in precision and data for marketing purposes. So before I turn it over to take some questions, I just wanted to kind of land on this thought here, which I think is useful in the context of trends. You know, these signals and trends are everywhere. We just need to be able to look around. And as the futurist and fiction writer William Gibson said, the future is here. It's just not evenly distributed. All right. So Lauren, I think I'll pass to you. I don't know if there were any questions that came up during the course of the presentation.
Yeah, we've got a couple that have come into the chat. So the first one is just a quick clarification on terminology. So what is a local publisher? I think you were talking about that in the email opt-out section.
Local publisher. Well, I think I may have been, and correct me if I'm wrong, I may have mentioned that in the advertising section around advertising. So one of the things that what I'm referring to there is that there might be, you know, a newspaper or media company that's based around your region that you want to advertise with. And so now you may want to work with them directly to understand what the local advertising opportunities are, given how difficult it is to be able to do some of the other types of targeting otherwise.
Thanks, Tim. So another one that's come in through John, he says, I'm curious about the email privacy opt-out. Our email system starts to suppress people who aren't engaging. So I'm wondering how this option will impact how engaged people are and if we keep emailing them.
Yeah, I think that's it's a really good point, John. And so one of the things that is going to be tricky to do is around list management. And so what that refers to, as I'm sure you know, John, is taking a look at those people that aren't engaging to make sure that you're kind of A, if you can re-engage them, and B, if you can't, kind of archive them. But it's difficult to be able to do that if we don't know who's actually opening the emails. And so I think list management is just going to become one of these things that's going to be a little less accurate. And so that kind of goes back to the earlier point of how do we start to kind of understand how engaged people are beyond opt-in. And so we can look at things like click-through, outcome-based measures and attribution, as well as surveys. But I think that's one it's going to be a difficult thing for us to be able to do based solely on open rates going forward.
Thanks, Tim. Another one from Todd is, what are some of the best micro donation options that you've seen for an arts organization?
Yeah, the ones that I've probably seen, and you're probably more familiar with these than I am, is the ones that I've seen most would be kind of based around Patreon. But one that I found really interesting was if you can go onto Twitch, and you don't need to be a gamer to be able to do this, but follow a couple of different creators and see the options that they use and have plugged into their own pages. Because what I found really interesting is there's quite a different variety of ways to be able to monetize. There could be, you know, people that would be kind of adding things around subscribers. There could be merchandise. There could be affiliate links. And there could be other ways to do kind of micro donations, like buying a sub or buying something for somebody else. So as a place to start, if you haven't already, I'd really encourage you to check that out and take a look at somebody's kind of page to be able to kind of see all of the different ways that they're monetizing. And then there are, from there, different tools that you can use to be able to monetize. But I think the first part is figuring out, you know, what type makes the most sense for the nature of what you're doing and the relationship that you have with your audience.
Thanks, Tim. Another one that's come in from Kat, and I see Frederick has responded in the chat, but she's noticing that there's a lot of surveys during COVID, and she's wondering how she can make her own survey stand out and be enticing for patrons to actually complete.
Yeah, I think there's a lot. I've noticed that as well. And there's one that we actually went through with the course. The National Ballet did one. And I think it makes sense because a lot of people are really, you know, doing a bit of soul searching and planning and understanding what people want and what reactions could be to different kinds of decisions that they could make around pricing or the type of content that they want to be able to share. The ones that I would, if you wanted something to be able to stand out, you can always, you know, use an incentive for people to be able to do that. And then I think the other one is making it feel like there's some benefit to the audience. Like obviously you have people that you have a relationship with. I would say within the copy itself, I think there could be something done around help us help you, and making sure that this survey doesn't feel self-serving. It's their opportunity to be able to inform you of what they're most interested in. And so maybe a combination of both of those things where it's clearly for someone opening for that of what's in it for me.
Thanks, Tim. And just a couple questions have come in direct message. We will be circulating a copy of the slide deck and the recording after this. And one other question that came in direct message. You mentioned a fundraising platform near the end of the creator economy section. Was that Patreon or was that a different platform? Okay, Patreon.
Yep.
Great. All right. I think that's all of the questions that have come in so far. If anyone has them, get them in right quickly. But if not, over to you, Catherine.
Okay, I will carefully unmute and attempt to get my camera back in action. Actually, I'm looking at a few other things here. I note that Frédéric Julien from our partners at Capicoa is mentioning that they are doing a Wikidata introductory workshop on the 3rd of November. You can check the chat for the link to that, and we can also include that when we're sending out follow-up materials. Really encourage people to fill out the survey. Sorry, folks, we've got a post-event survey as well, and would love to get your feedback on this session. It really helps us plan for future sessions like this one. Tim, I don't know how you managed to fit in that compact a presentation on such an important topic and an ever-changing topic. You know, the number of marketers who lost it when Apple upped their privacy was just really quite extraordinary. The things we thought we knew were true are constantly changing. I guess that's what keeps things interesting. And again, on behalf of the partner organizations, with gratitude to the Canada Council for the Arts, and also great thanks to the folks who joined us on the line today. Thank you so much, everyone, and we hope to see you back in December for Tim's next presentation. We'll keep you posted. Thank you so much for your interest and your participation. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.